The next talk that we have lined up for you is How to Show a Game Internationally, I guess, by Amanda Hudgins. Amanda Hudgins is a non-binary game designer and former rugby player based out of Lexington, Kentucky. You can find more about their work on Twitter at @barelyconcealed and through their website, amandathrows.rocks. Amanda?
I don't know if you're supposed to clap before I start talking. Sets a really high standard. Hi, I'm Amanda. Okay, so first things first, this talk is, it's for professionally and creatively minded developers who looking to probably, there we go. Better? Okay, so this talk is for professionally and creative mindedly devs who are looking to find out about how to show your games at all kinds of different places, from like small punk shows in like bars to like big anime conventions. And so maybe this talk is for you. So this is kind of what I mean by those shows. So this is the Alt Control Party at GDC in 2018, Anime Central, which is a show out of Central Chicago, and the Hand-Eye Society Ball, which is in Toronto, and which was great. And this is from last year, because I think they're about to have this year's show. So back to who am I? Hi, I'm Amanda Hudgins. I'm barely concealed on Twitter. I make stuff, basically. If you've heard of me, it's probably either for the 1,000 Button Project, which is this giant, big button installation thing where you play a fighting game. Or you might have heard of the game where I smashed 16 guitars at Bit Bash this year. So, who needs a guitar? I don't. Okay, so this is an important talk because my games only exist at shows. There's no commercial release strategy. I'm never putting my games up on Steam. There's no PS4 console release. This is it. They only exist at shows. So for me, going to shows becomes really, really important. Because if I don't go to shows, then by nature, then my games don't exist, which is kind of weird. So for me, shows, art galleries, those are my end consumer. So it's a little bit different than your average sort of developer. Maybe. Okay. So how do you find wrong thing. There we go. So how do you find the right event for you? In my opinion, finding shows is kind of like a snowball effect. Once you find one, the other ones kind of find you, and then you just keep building and building and building until you're maybe going to too many shows, and you've gone to 12 shows in 11 months, and that's maybe too many. Stop doing that. With that in mind, a friend of mine named Rafe, I believe he's Lunar Signals on Twitter, or he's making moonfields, or it's the other way around. I always get confused on his Twitter name and his game. He said these are like his advice points for this. Rafe has like an actual background in hospitality, so he's really good at talking to people. But his big thing is you want to be able to have a video or a GIF ready of your game at all moments notice. Like it's on your phone. It's like people showing off pictures of their baby or their dog. Like just show that kind of thing off. Sync up with communities. So like find every Slack that's related to your thing and do that. Be willing to travel because people love people who travel. That's how I got to go to a show in Madison, was mostly because they invited me, and then I said yes. And I'm from Central Kentucky. Madison was a 12-hour drive, but people just really love it when you can travel. Also look for adjacent events, so things that aren't necessarily game developing shows, but are kind of related to those things. And the rest of those are kind of, there's a word for what I'm trying to say, but basically like do cold connects, keep connected with everyone, and focus your search kind of broadly. So on the point of like looking for more non-traditional events, look for things like art galleries who often really love when you bring games in because they don't have games. So they're usually really excited to show things. There's usually, if your local art community probably has like a casting or sort of a art announcement thing on their own page. Ours does, where they're like, here are the next 10 local art shows. You can pitch your game here. Or they mean they can pitch your art piece, but you can also sometimes pitch your game if it works thematically. Night markets, public gatherings. I showed at the state fair last year for Kentucky because they had an interactive art section. They were thinking more websites, but they still took my game. And the state fair in Kentucky gets 100,000 visitors over the course of 2 weeks. That's a group of people that I would otherwise never encounter. Those are firmly not the regular demographic I hit. But it's also a fact of like knowing your community. Where do people you know congregate? Where do they go to? Are they at are they at local bars? Are they at, you know, the state fair? If they're not, you can be there. But it's also a good idea to track down these shows and still engage with them. And this all kind of goes back to to building a scene. So what you want to do is build your own scene. You want people to be excited about your project, and the best way for them to do that is for them to see your game like everywhere. So when they go to a show or something, they're excited to see you. I have people who will come out of nowhere and be like, oh, I saw your game last year at this thing. Or I've had people tell me that my game was at Indiecade. I've never shown at Indiecade, but they're very insistent. And then when I say no, they say, oh, Indiecade East. It's also never been at Indiecade East. But if you show your game at enough places, then people think you're everywhere, which is kind of a perk unto itself. So also, I recommend traveling, but I also recommend kind of showing locally. So the Midwest is full of so many shows. These aren't even all of them. These are just pretty much just ones I've attended in the last 2 years. But stuff like BitBash out of Chicago, Sigma Plays out of Indiana, Vector, which I run, just out of Kentucky, which I help run. Red Bull does a bunch of events, and they almost always are looking for indie games to put in the back of their fighting game tournaments, which is a pretty good way to get more people to play your game. Something like GDEX, Indie Game Party is a now defunct thing, but it's out of Madison. But the same people are still up there doing stuff like MDev. PixelPop, obviously. Anime Central out of Chicago, really any anime event. There's also stuff that's further afield, MagFest, which has a bunch of other satellite organizations. I think MagWest is running right now. But yeah, seriously, be willing and interested in looking further afield. Last year I attended 2 international shows within about a month and a half. One was the Hand-Eye Society out of Toronto, and the other one was a show called Out of Index in Seoul, South Korea. And those are different because I usually show at smaller venues, and those were smaller, but I also had to get my project across international lines and get judged by Border Patrol for having a very large button installation. But it's really a great way for people to see your stuff out of the context of the stuff they normally see, and also you get to show something in Seoul. That's cool. So there are calendars for these kinds of things. There used to be something called Promoter App, but I think that's down. This is another one. It has a very long name, which is occupiergames.com/festivals. It's a pretty good resource for this kind of thing, for finding what games are up and what their deadlines are and what platforms they're accepting games on. And so that's but something like that's a good, and generally being on Twitter and Slack and all those things, different people's Slacks, different people's Discords, you can really figure out where the games are being able to show and when their deadlines are. Also, brief plug, throw your own shows. I do, it's great. And then the big one, this is my big one, is don't be afraid to ask for money. If you can't attend shows due to finances, tell people. Tell event organizers mostly, because sometimes they can help solve that problem. Yeah, you can do that. I do that. So there are a few responses you can get. No. Unfortunately, we won't be able to offer assistance with travel expenses. I think we could spare 100 buckaroos from our Getting Games Here budget. There was no response that they could attend in person from other selected developers, and you're the only person who asked for additional expenses, so we've decided to support your game by spending the fund for other selected devs. All of these are actual responses I got. So, like, yes, you can get no. I get no a decent amount of times. You can also get people who are like, oh yeah, no, that's fine. The other options, they're just, and also like different things. So if your game can run without you there, so no custom hardware, stuff like that, some shows will also just show the game. So a couple of years ago, there's a Super Friendship Arcade, which is out of Johannesburg, and I sent them my my partner's game, which is called, I think they sent them The Lickening, which is a tongue-based dueling game. It's kind of like, they were very excited to show it, but what that means is we obviously didn't go to South Africa. I still haven't been to South Africa, but his game was shown in South Africa. And so when we went to GDC the next year, we had people come up to us and go, oh my God, I played your game at the Super Friendship Arcade and it was so good. So like, your game can go places you can't, especially if it doesn't have a very large board with 100 buttons in it. Consider not making a game with 100 buttons in it. But the basic gist of this is that people will not know that you cannot attend their show unless you tell them. If you don't tell them, like, hey, this is a really big financial problem for me, they're never gonna offer you money. They're never gonna be like, oh yeah, we have extra funds to help you get here. You kind of have to ask yourself. So the big thing is, how do you ask for money from events? The first thing is your need real, so be selective. What I mean by this is don't just be like, oh man, I really want to go to PAX this year. Why do you want to go to PAX this year? What are you getting from going to PAX? Are you making, like, what connections are you going to make there? What kinds of things are you going to do there? Don't just ask for money to ask for money. That doesn't really work usually. Secondly, be polite. I usually joke that I can be so polite in emails that you can wonder if I'm being offensive, but that's a point. That's the thing I learned from an English teacher in high school. Like, I want to be so polite and also kind of really dumb. Like, I really don't understand why you suddenly decided you wanted to move me from funding my trip to $350. I'm so sorry. I'm so confused. But you have to be so polite, so obnoxiously polite, because a lot of people aren't in our industry, so you end up kind of getting a little extra bump. And also, people love to be treated with respect. That sounds really obvious, because it kind of is, but people remember that. Always respond, always. So that's an example of something I sent to a conference earlier this year, which is just, I'll have to respectfully decline my invite. I love your event, your lineup looks great, I can't attend, that kind of thing. And I do mean always. I send thank yous for rejection letters. Like, if somebody sends me back a thing saying we can't do this, I'm like, cool, absolutely, love it. You have to always be willing to be there and be present. And also, fourth, be super okay with no. No is a great answer. No means you get to spend no money and you don't have to do this thing. No is great. No is the best answer you can get. That also gives you a great, powerful positioning in terms of bargaining, because the best thing that can happen is for somebody to say no. Like, I'm a hardcore introvert. I don't love talking in front of people. So for me, no is great. No means I stay home. I could be watching a movie right now. Like, that's why no is fantastic. This goes back to sort of that general, like, prep for the show, but so generally this, which is the first day of the show, is way, way before the show. So Do things like order your printables 2 weeks before the event, test your hardware before the show, have a finished build of your game at least a week before the show, things like that. So carry duplicates of everything you can afford. And what I mean by that is mostly this. So this is my travel kit for the board. There's like Clorox wipes, all of the tools I need, 3 copies of the Arduino that run my game, because I've had 2 fail before to show, so I've got 3. Like cough drops, everything. I have an extra pair of shoes in there. Like, I'm very, very prepared. But these are the kinds of things you need to have just in case. You never know if you're going to get there and they're not going to have masking tape so that you can, put your cords down on the ground properly. Bring controllers, specific ones that you use for demoing, not your home stuff, because people are disgusting. And it's nice if you have a separate set of controllers that you can just clean and never actually touch in your own home. Take pictures of everything that happens. There's a crew here from Louisville for Kickbot Games. They're fantastic. You should check out their game if you haven't yet. And their big thing is, one of the things they did for their Bit Bash show was they set up a webcam to record everyone playing their game. That's great video content. That's perfect. And have some sort of swag, something users can take away from your table rather than just trying to remember your name. That can be just about anything. And then what do you do after the show? Do something with all that media you captured. I actually tend to send copies of all the pictures and video I take to the organizers of shows I've attended, just in case, because you never know. And sometimes people really can use it. Send thank you shows if you go to a really small show, I think Feral Vector was really small. I sent them a thank you for having me. I send thank yous to some of the bigger shows too, they've been really nice. And then connect with friends. So Raph, the guy I mentioned earlier, we met at Indie Arcade, which took forever to get to, and then afterwards we talked on Twitter, we met again at Train Jam, we met again at GDC, and then he invited me to his event, which was the Indie Game Party at Anime Central in Chicago. So these connections you make, not to be too mercenary about it, but the connections you make with people at events allows you the opportunity to go to other events, which kind of fits in with that snowball effect. And yeah, that's me. I don't know if anybody has questions. I kind of covered a lot. Originally, this was a 45-minute talk. Anybody? Oh, I don't ship it. Yeah. A lot of people ask me to. It's kind of complicated. So what I actually do is, for Soul, beforehand I didn't have a copy of my board that would fit in a carry-on suitcase. So I took a smaller version of my board I had made for a different event, and I cut it in half. And then I folded it in half, and then I shoved it into a suitcase. And now I take it on the road with me. So if you're a show I have to travel by flight to, like the Smithsonian Arcade thing this year and Feral Vector, it was literally a piece of luggage. It fits just inside of that luggage. Also, TSA broke it at one point, so it only kind of works now. But listen, it's real hard to find a suitcase that big. Okay. Is the what about what? The second half? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, the button board was originally designed for a 2-month art show at a children's art museum kind of thing. So it was originally designed for that. And yeah, it's more for the fact that that's what I enjoy making. I have a job where I make commercial release games with Super Soul. We have Kentucky Dash in that other room. So I do a little bit of both. But there are more things to learn, I think, from showing something that's harder to show. Anyone else? I got a minute warning, so. Yep.
When you are pitching to an event and they say, oh, we can only offer you $100, maybe you need $1,000.
Yeah.
Is that an instant, oh, sorry, I can't, or do you push a little bit? Oh, no, but I actually need this much.
don't necessarily push, but you just be very clear that you weren't kidding when you said you needed 1,000. And then you have to make your own calculations on whether you meant that. Like, I've had shows that they've come back and been like, well, we can really only offer you about 1/4. And I've thought about it and I've been like, well, this will be my first show in Europe. So that'll be really cool. I've never been to Europe. I'd like to show in Europe. This might be a good opportunity. Is this worth it for me to like take this cut? And then the other one is sometimes they just say no. And that's fine. I think I'm supposed to stop now because he's holding up a time's up sign. But I'm around.